The concrete wall crumbled like stale bread as the sledgehammer struck it for the third time. Marcus Rodriguez, the demolition contractor, expected to find nothing but rats and maybe some old newspapers behind the false wall of the abandoned Texaco station. What he found instead was a child's pink backpack, its fabric somehow preserved despite 12 years of hiding in darkness. Inside the backpack, beneath layers of dust and the musty smell of forgotten time, lay a collection of items that would reopen the most haunting missing person case in Crawford County's history. A diary with pages filled in purple ink, a friendship bracelet made of yellow and blue thread, 3 Polaroid photographs, and a small silver locket containing a photo of a family of 4 standing beside a blue minivan. The family in the photograph was the Hendersons, and the girl who owned the backpack was their daughter, Emma Henderson, who had vanished without a trace during a family road trip to Yellowstone National Park in the summer of 2012. Detective Sarah Chun had been fresh out of the academy when Emma disappeared. Now, 12 years later, she was the lead investigator for the Crawford County Sheriff's Department, and the Henderson case had become her white whale. She'd never stopped thinking about that 9-year-old girl with the bright smile and the gap between her front teeth, who had somehow vanished from a locked motel room while her family slept. The call came in at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in September. Marcus Rodriguez's voice shook as he described finding the backpack. Sarah was there within 20 minutes, her heart pounding as she stared at the evidence that could finally provide answers to questions that had haunted her for over a decade. "Nobody's touched anything," Marcus assured her, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool autumn air. "Soon as I saw what it was, I called you folks. My sister, she went to school with Emma Henderson. I remember when she went missing. Whole town was looking for her." Sarah carefully photographed the scene before extracting the backpack with gloved hands. The pink fabric, though faded, still bore the outline of cartoon unicorns. She remembered Emma's mother, Linda Henderson, describing this exact backpack to her 12 years ago, tears streaming down her face as she recounted every detail of what her daughter had been wearing when she disappeared. Marcus Rodriguez had been just 19 when Emma disappeared, working summers for his uncle's construction company while attending community college. He remembered the search parties, the helicopters circling overhead, the way the whole town had come together to look for the missing girl. His sister Carmen had been in Emma's class at school, and the 2 girls had been friendly, though not particularly close. Carmen used to have nightmares for months after Emma disappeared, Marcus told Sarah as they waited for the crime scene unit to arrive. She'd wake up screaming, saying the bad man was going to come for her too. My parents had to take her to therapy. A lot of kids in town did. Sarah nodded, remembering those difficult months when every parent in Crawford had lived in fear. The disappearance of a child from what should have been a safe place had shattered the community's sense of security. Parents had stopped letting their children walk to school alone. Motel bookings had plummeted. The town had lived under a cloud of suspicion and fear that had never fully lifted. The Hendersons had been traveling from their home in Minneapolis to Yellowstone for what was supposed to be a week-long family vacation. David Henderson, an insurance adjuster, had meticulously planned the trip, marking stops along the way on a road atlas. Linda Henderson, a kindergarten teacher, had packed enough snacks and activities to keep their 2 children occupied during the long drive. Emma, 9 years, old and fascinated by animals, had been excited about seeing buffalo and bears. Her younger brother, Tommy, then 7, had been more interested in the promise of campfires and s'mores. They had stopped for the night at the Sunset Motel in Crawford, a small town that served as a way station for travelers heading to the national parks. The motel was nothing special. 2 dozen rooms arranged in an L shape around a small parking lot. with a flickering neon sign that buzzed through the night. But it was clean and affordable, and the Henderson family had arrived tired after driving for 8 hours. The last confirmed sighting of Emma Henderson was at 9:30 p.m. on July 15, 2012, when she had brushed her teeth in the motel bathroom while her mother supervised. Linda Henderson had tucked both children into the room's second bed, kissed them goodnight, and settled into her own bed beside her husband. The door was locked, the chain was engaged, and the windows were sealed shut due to the air conditioning. When Linda Henderson woke up at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, Emma was gone. The search that followed was massive and immediate. Law enforcement from 3 counties joined the effort, along with hundreds of volunteers from Crawford and surrounding towns. Search dogs tracked Emma's scent to the parking lot of the motel, where it mysteriously vanished. The FBI was called, and after 48 hours, treating the case as a suspected abduction, every registered sex offender within a 100-mile radius was questioned. The family's finances and personal relationships were scrutinized. David Henderson submitted to a polygraph test, as did several motel employees. But despite the exhaustive investigation, no trace of Emma Henderson was found. No witnesses came forward with credible sightings. No demands for ransom were made. The girl had simply vanished, leaving behind a family destroyed by grief and guilt, and a community that would never feel quite safe again. The original investigation had been led by Detective Ray Morrison, a 25-year veteran of the department who had handled dozens of missing person cases. Morrison had been thorough and methodical, but he had also been approaching retirement and perhaps lacked the obsessive drive that missing child cases required. He had followed proper procedures, interviewed all the relevant witnesses, and pursued every lead that seemed promising. But after 6 months without significant progress, the case had gradually moved to the back burner. Morrison had retired 2 years after Emma's disappearance, troubled by his inability to solve the case. He had handed over his files to Sarah Chun, who had just been promoted to detective. Sarah had approached the case with fresh eyes and renewed energy, but she too had struggled to find new leads. The trail had gone cold, and despite periodic reviews and the occasional new tip, the case had remained unsolved. Now, 12 years later, Sarah Chun held Emma's backpack in her hands and felt the weight of all those unanswered questions. She carefully opened the diary, her hands trembling slightly as she read the first entry, dated just 2 days before Emma's disappearance. July 13th, 2012. We're going to Yellowstone. Mom says we'll see bears and maybe wolves. Tommy is scared of the bears, but I'm not. I hope we see a baby bear. I packed my camera to take pictures. Dad says it's going to be the best vacation ever. Sarah's throat tightened as she read the innocent words of a child who had no idea what was about to happen to her. She flipped through more pages, noting Emma's excited observations about the places they'd stopped along the way. There were entries about roadside attractions, interesting rock formations, and the various motels where they had stayed. Emma had been a precocious child, observant and articulate beyond her years. July 14th, 2012, we stopped at the world's largest ball of twine. Today, it was kind of stupid, but Tommy thought it was cool. We had lunch at a diner where the waitress called me honey and gave me extra ice cream. Mom and Dad seem happy. They've been laughing a lot on this trip. I love seeing them happy. The entries painted a picture of a normal, happy family enjoying a vacation together. There were no hints of trouble, no indications that anything was amiss. Emma had been excited about the trip, close to her family, and completely unaware of any danger. The last entry was dated July 15th, 2012, the day she disappeared. July 15th, 2012. We're at a motel in Crawford. It's not very pretty, but Mom says we'll only be here one night. There's a vending machine that has my favorite chips. The man at the desk was nice and gave Tommy a coloring book. I can't wait to get to Yellowstone tomorrow. I hope the weather is good for hiking. Sarah closed the diary carefully and examined the Polaroid photographs. One showed the Henderson family at a roadside attraction, a giant dinosaur statue that Sarah recognized from Highway 89. David Henderson had his arm around his wife's shoulders, while Emma and Tommy grinned at the camera. Another photo showed Emma feeding a deer at what appeared to be a petting zoo. The third photograph was different from the others. It showed the interior of what looked like a basement or underground room, with concrete walls and a single bear. Light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The third photograph changed everything. Sarah immediately called for backup and requested that the crime scene unit return to the demolished gas station. If Emma's backpack had been hidden behind this wall, there might be other evidence here. As the investigation team combed through the debris, Sarah drove to the Henderson family's current address, her mind racing with possibilities and dreading. The conversation she was about to have. The drive to the Henderson house took Sarah through the heart of Crawford, past the elementary school where Linda Henderson taught, past the insurance office where David Henderson worked, past the community center where Tommy Henderson had played basketball as a child. It was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the disappearance of one child had affected every family. Crawford had changed in the 12 years since Emma's disappearance. The town had grown slightly, with new businesses opening along the main highway and several new housing developments on the outskirts. But it had never fully recovered from the shadow cast by the unsolved case. Tourism had declined, and the town's reputation had been permanently altered by the tragedy. The Hendersons had never left Crawford. After Emma's disappearance, they had found it impossible to return to their old life in Minneapolis. The house there held too many memories, too many reminders of their daughter. They had also felt the need to stay close to the last place Emma had been seen, as if leaving would somehow be abandoning her. David had transferred to a local insurance office, taking a significant pay cut but finding comfort in the slower pace of small-town life. Linda had taken a job at Crawford Elementary School, where she taught kindergarten and first grade. The work was emotionally difficult. Every blonde-haired girl in her classroom reminded her of Emma, but it also provided a sense of purpose and connection to the community. They had moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, a modest two-bedroom home with a large backyard that backed up to a wooded area. The house was nothing like their spacious suburban home in Minneapolis, but it was theirs, and it was where they had learned to live with their grief. Tommy Henderson was now 19, a sophomore at the local community college studying criminal justice. He had grown up in the shadow of his sister's disappearance, carrying the weight of survivors' guilt and the burden of being the brother who had slept through whatever happened that night. He had dedicated his life to understanding criminal investigation, hoping that someday he might be able to contribute to solving his sister's case. Tommy had been profoundly affected by Emma's disappearance. At 7 years old, he had struggled to understand why his sister was gone and why his parents were so sad all the time. He had blamed himself for not waking up, for not protecting her, for not being able to tell the police what had happened. As he got older, these feelings had evolved into a determination to pursue justice, not just for Emma, but for all victims of crime. Linda Henderson answered the door when Sarah knocked, and the detective saw immediately that the years had not been kind to Emma's mother. Her hair, once blonde like her daughter's, was now streaked with gray, and her eyes held the permanent sadness of a parent who had lost a child. She had lost weight over the years, and her face had a gaunt quality that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much worry. "Detective Chun," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it? Have you found something?" Sarah held up the evidence bag containing the backpack. Linda's knees buckled, and she had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. The sight of her daughter's backpack, the one she had watched Emma pack so carefully for the trip, was almost too much to bear. David Henderson appeared behind his wife, his face going pale as he saw what Sarah was holding. Over the years, David had aged dramatically. His dark hair was now mostly gray, and his face was lined with the stress of 12 years of uncertainty. He had developed a nervous habit of checking locks and windows obsessively, a remnant of the trauma of losing his daughter from what should have been a secure location. Where was all David could manage to say? Behind a wall at the old Texaco station on Highway 89, Sarah replied. The station that's been closed for about 10 years. A contractor found it during demolition. Tommy Henderson emerged from the house, having heard the commotion. At 19, he was tall and lean, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. The eyes that were so much like Emma's that Sarah sometimes found it difficult to look at him directly. Tommy had grown into a serious young man, old beyond his years, with a gravity that came from experiencing profound loss at a young age. "Is there anything else?" Tommy asked, his voice steady despite the tears that had started to fall. "Any other evidence?" Sarah showed them the photographs, watching as the family studied each image. They immediately recognized the first two photos they had been taken during the early days of their trip, happy moments that now seemed to belong to a different lifetime. But the third photograph, the one showing the basement room, meant nothing to them. "I've never seen this place before," David sighed, his voice hollow. "Emma must have taken this picture after she was taken." "Which means she was alive long enough to take photographs," Linda whispered, hope and horror warring in her voice. "She was alive, and she was trying to leave us clues." The family gathered in their small living room, a space that had become a shrine to Emma's memory. Photographs of her covered every surface school pictures, family vacations, candid shots of her playing with Tommy or reading books. There were also reminders of the ongoing search for her, newspaper clippings, flyers with her picture, and a bulletin board covered with maps and timelines that Tommy had created as part of his own investigation into the case. Sarah examined the bulletin board, impressed by the thoroughness of Tommy's research. He had mapped out every step of the family's journey, identified every person who had interacted with them, and created detailed timelines of their activities. He had also collected information about similar cases in the region, looking for patterns that might provide clues about what had happened to Emma. "This is remarkable work," Sarah told Tommy. "You've put together connections that we missed in the original investigation." Tommy had spent countless hours researching the case, driven by a need to understand what had happened to his sister. He had obtained copies of police reports through Freedom of Information requests, had interviewed former motel employees and other witnesses, and had even traveled to other towns to research similar cases. His work had been meticulous and thorough, and Sarah realized that he had developed skills that would serve him well in his chosen career. "I've been working on this since I was old enough to understand what happened," Tommy said. "I know I was just a kid when Emma disappeared, but I remember things about that night. Little details that might be important." Sarah had interviewed Tommy several times over the years, but she had always been careful not to push too hard. Children's memories were notoriously unreliable, and she didn't want to implant false memories or traumatize him further. But now, with new evidence to work with, she was eager to hear what he might remember. "What do you remember about that night?" Sarah asked gently. Tommy was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant as he thought back to that traumatic night 12 years ago. "I remember Emma was excited about getting to Yellowstone the next day. She kept talking about the animals we were going to see. She had her camera with her, and she was taking pictures of everything." "Do you remember anything unusual?" "About the motel?" anyone who seemed out of place. There was a man at the front desk when we checked in. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair. He gave me a coloring book and some crayons. Emma thought he was nice, but there was something about him that made me uncomfortable. Sarah made notes as Tommy spoke, knowing that this description might be important. The original investigation had identified all the motel employees who had been working that night, but memories fade over time, and witnesses sometimes remember details years later that they had forgotten initially. What else do you remember? I remember waking up in the middle of the night. I thought I heard voices, but I was really tired, and I just went back to sleep. I've always wondered if I heard Emma talking to someone, if I could have done something to help her. The guilt in Tommy's voice was palpable, and Sarah felt her heart break for him. She had seen this kind of survivor's guilt before, the way family members tortured themselves with what-if scenarios and self-blame. It was one of the cruelest aspects of these cases, the way they destroyed not just the immediate victim, but everyone who loved them. You were 7 years old, Sarah said firmly. There was nothing you could have done. And what you've told me might be very important. Those voices you heard could be evidence that Emma was communicating with her abductor. The next few days brought a flurry of activity as the investigation into Emma's disappearance was officially reopened. Sarah assembled a team of investigators, including several officers who had worked on the original case, and they began the painstaking process of reviewing all the evidence and following up on new leads. The basement room in the photograph became the focus of intense scrutiny. Sarah and her team showed the image to everyone they could find who had lived in or around Crawford 12 years ago, hoping someone would recognize the location. They posted the photograph on social media, distributed it to local media outlets, and showed it to real estate agents, contractors, and anyone else who might have knowledge of properties in the area. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Margaret Flores, an elderly woman who had worked as a cleaning lady at various businesses around town, saw the photograph on the local news and immediately called the police station. I know that basement, she told Sarah when they met at the station. I cleaned it every week for 3 years. It's under the old Hendricks place on Mill Street. Margaret Flores was in her 70s, a small, sharp-eyed woman who had spent decades cleaning offices and homes throughout Crawford. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of the town's buildings and their interiors, and she was absolutely certain about the identification of the basement. I worked for Mr. Hendricks from 2005 to 2008, Margaret explained. He was a strange man, very particular about his privacy. He didn't like me going down to the basement very often, but I had to clean it occasionally. It was set up like a workshop with concrete walls and that hanging light bulb. Sarah felt a surge of excitement. The Hendricks property had been abandoned for nearly 15 years, but it had been occupied at the time of Emma's disappearance. This was the first concrete lead they had developed in the case. What can you tell me about Harold Hendricks? Sarah asked. Margaret's expression grew troubled. He was an odd man, very secretive. He lived alone in that big house, and he didn't seem to have any friends or family. He worked at the motel sometimes, doing maintenance work. I always thought there was something not right about him. Did you ever see him with children? No, never. He didn't seem to like children much. When kids would come around selling candy or cookies for school fundraisers, he would chase them away. He was very particular about his privacy. Sarah obtained a search warrant within hours and assembled a team to investigate the property. The house itself was a 2-story Victorian that had once been beautiful, but now stood as a testament to neglect. The front porch sagged under the weight of collapsed roof tiles, and the windows were boarded up with plywood that had warped and split over the years. The property had been abandoned since Harold Hendricks' death in 2008. His estate had been tied up in legal proceedings for years, with distant relatives arguing over the inheritance and the property falling into disrepair. The house had become a local eyesore, and there had been periodic discussions about condemning it. But legal complications had prevented any action. But it was the basement that held their attention. Accessible through a separate entrance at the back of the house, the basement had been converted into some kind of workshop or storage area. The concrete walls and exposed ceiling joists matched the photograph perfectly. The bare light bulb still hung from its cord, though the power to the house had been disconnected years ago. The forensic team worked methodically, taking samples from every surface and documenting every detail. The basement was larger than it appeared in the photograph, with several rooms connected by narrow corridors. One room contained a workbench and tools. Another appeared to have been used for storage, and a third room was completely empty, except for a single chair positioned under the hanging light bulb. It was Sarah who found the most significant piece of evidence, a small section of the basement wall that had been recently painted over, the paint still slightly different in color from the rest of the wall. When they scraped away the paint, they found carved into the concrete, barely visible but unmistakably there, the initials E.H. and the date July 16th, 12, the day after Emma Henderson had disappeared. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Emma had been alive the day after her disappearance, and she had been held in this basement. But what had happened to her after that? And who had been responsible for her captivity? The forensic team continued their work, using luminol to detect traces of blood and other biological evidence. They found several areas where the luminol reacted, indicating that blood had been present at some point. DNA analysis would be needed to determine if any of the blood belonged to Emma, but the preliminary results were encouraging. In another room of the basement, they found evidence of recent occupancy, a mattress that had been moved against one wall, empty food containers, and a bucket that appeared to have been used as a makeshift toilet. The conditions were horrific, and Sarah couldn't help but imagine the terror that Emma must have experienced in this underground prison. The investigation into Harold Hendricks began in earnest. Sarah and her team combed through public records, looking for any information about the man who had apparently abducted Emma. What they found was a portrait of a deeply troubled individual with a history of mental illness and antisocial behavior. Harold Hendricks had been born in 1945, the only child of parents who had died in a car accident when he was 22. He had inherited the family home on Mill Street, along with a small insurance settlement that had provided him with a modest income. He had never married, had no children, and appeared to have had few friends or social connections. He had worked sporadically over the years, taking odd jobs and temporary positions. In 2010, he had been hired as a part-time maintenance worker at the Sunset Motel, where he had been responsible for minor repairs and general upkeep. The job had given him access to all the motel rooms and would have made him familiar with the layout of the building. The answer to some of the questions about Emma's fate would come from an unexpected source. Tommy Henderson himself. As the investigation intensified, Tommy had been conducting his own research into the case. Armed with the knowledge he had gained from his criminal justice studies and driven by a determination to find answers about his sister, he had spent countless hours going through old case files, interviewing former motel employees, and piecing together timelines. Tommy had developed a sophisticated understanding of criminal investigation techniques, and he had applied these skills to his sister's case with remarkable dedication. He had created detailed profiles of everyone who had been at the motel that night, had mapped out possible escape routes and hiding places, and had even studied the psychology of child abductors to better understand what might have happened to Emma. It was Tommy who discovered the connection between Harold Hendricks and the Sunset Motel. In 2012, Hendricks had been employed as a part-time maintenance worker at the motel responsible for minor repairs and upkeep. He had access to all the rooms and would have been familiar with the layout of the building. More importantly, Tommy discovered that Hendricks had been questioned during the original investigation, but had been cleared as a suspect. He had provided an alibi for the night of Emma's disappearance, claiming he had been at home watching television. No one had thought to verify his story more thoroughly, and Hendricks had been eliminated from consideration early in the investigation. But Tommy's research revealed disturbing details about Harold Hendricks that the original investigation had missed. He had been arrested twice in the 1990s for trespassing and prowling, charges that had been dropped due to lack of evidence. He had no known friends or family in the area, and neighbors described him as strange and antisocial. Tommy had also discovered that Hendricks had been terminated from several jobs over the years due to inappropriate behavior. He had been fired from a janitorial position at a local school after teachers complained that he had been asking children personal questions and offering them candy. He had been let go from a job at a daycare center after parents complained about his interactions with their children. Most significantly, Tommy discovered that Hendricks had died in September 2008, just 2 months after Emma's disappearance. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but Tommy found it suspicious that Hendricks had died so soon after Emma's disappearance. Sarah was impressed by Tommy's detective work and began to see him as a valuable ally in the investigation. Together, they constructed a timeline of events that painted a disturbing picture of what might have happened to Emma Henderson. According to their theory, Harold Hendricks had been watching the Henderson family from the moment they arrived at the motel. As a maintenance worker, he would have had access to master keys and would have known the routines of the motel staff. He would have been able to observe the family's activities and plan his approach. The voices that Tommy remembered hearing in the middle of the night were likely Emma talking to Hendricks, possibly as he was luring her out of the room. Hendricks might have told her that there was a problem with the plumbing or electricity, or that her parents had asked him to move her to another room. A trusting 9-year-old would have followed an adult who appeared to be in authority. Hendricks had then taken Emma to his basement, where he had held her captive for an unknown period of time. Emma, frightened but resourceful, had managed to take a photograph of her prison with her Polaroid camera. She had also carved her initials into the wall, perhaps hoping that someone would eventually find them. The diary entries that Emma had written during her captivity provided additional clues about her experience. Sarah found several pages that had been written after Emma's disappearance, entries that described her fear and confusion, but also her determination to survive. July 16, 2012. I don't know where I am. The man from the motel brought me here. He says my parents told him to take me somewhere safe, but I don't believe him. I want to go home. I'm scared, but I'm trying to be brave. July 17, 2012. I'm still in the basement. The man brings me food sometimes, but he won't let me go. I took a picture of this place with my camera. Maybe someone will find it and know where I am. I hid my backpack in case I get a chance to escape. July 18, 2012. I tried to get out today, but the door is locked. The man says he's going to take me somewhere else soon. I don't want to go. I wrote a letter to Mom and Dad in case something happens to me. I hope they find it. The entries painted a heartbreaking picture of a child trying to cope with an unimaginable situation. Emma had remained remarkably calm and resourceful, even in the face of terror. She had continued to think strategically, hiding evidence and leaving clues for investigators. But what had happened to Emma after that remained a mystery. The diary entries stopped after July 18th, and there were no more clues about her fate. Had she died in captivity? Had she been killed by Hendricks? Or had she somehow escaped, only to meet with some other fate? The investigation into Harold Hendricks revealed that he had been a deeply disturbed individual with a history of mental illness and violent tendencies. Medical records showed that he had been treated for depression and anxiety and had been prescribed various medications over the years. But he had also been suspected of more serious crimes, including the disappearance of a teenage girl in a neighboring county in 1995. That case had never been solved, and the girl had never been found. But the similarities between that disappearance and Emma's case were striking. Both girls had vanished without a trace. Both had been abducted from secure locations, and both had been young and blonde. Jennifer Walsh had been 16 when she disappeared from her family's home in Millbrook, a town about 40 miles from Crawford. She had been asleep in her bedroom when she vanished, and like Emma, she had left no trace of her whereabouts. The case had been investigated extensively, but no suspects had ever been identified. Sarah began to suspect that Harold Hendricks might have been a serial predator, operating in the area for years without being detected. The isolated nature of his property and his access to various locations through his work would have provided him with ample opportunities to commit crimes without being noticed. But if Hendricks was responsible for Emma's disappearance, and if he had died in 2008, then Emma was almost certainly dead as well. The realization was devastating for the Henderson family, who had clung to the hope that their daughter might still be alive somewhere. However, the investigation took another unexpected turn when the forensic team made a startling discovery in the basement of the Hendricks property. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they found a collection of items that belonged to Emma Henderson: her hairbrush, a pair of her socks, and a small stuffed animal that her parents confirmed she had taken on the trip. But they also found something else, items that didn't belong to Emma. A teenager's ID card from 1995, belonging to Jennifer Walsh, the girl who had disappeared from the neighboring county. A child's sneaker from 1999, a woman's wedding ring from 2003, a man's wallet from 2006. The basement had been Harold Hendricks' trophy room, where he had kept mementos from his victims. The discovery suggested that Emma Henderson had been just one of many victims in a killing spree that had lasted for years. As the investigation expanded, law enforcement agencies from across the region began to review cold cases from the past. 2 decades looking for connections to Harold Hendricks. They found several cases that fit the pattern: young women, girls who had disappeared without a trace, often from secure locations, with no witnesses and no evidence left behind. Scope of Hendricks' crimes was staggering. Over the course of nearly 20 years, he appeared to have abducted and murdered at least 7 people, possibly more. His victims ranged in age from 9 to 42, and they had disappeared from towns throughout the region. The investigation revealed that Hendricks had been far more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized. He had carefully planned each abduction, studying his victims' routines and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. He had used his various jobs to gain access to potential victims, and he had been careful to avoid leaving evidence that could link him to the crimes. But the most significant discovery came when they found a journal hidden in the walls of Hendricks' house. Written in his own hand, the journal contained detailed accounts of his crimes, including the abduction and murder of Emma Henderson. The journal was a disturbing document, filled with graphic descriptions of violence and sexual assault. Sarah found it difficult to read, but she forced herself to go through every page, looking for clues about what had happened to Emma and the other victims. According to the journal, Hendricks had been watching the Henderson family from the moment they arrived at the motel. He had noted their room number and had observed their routines. He had been particularly interested in Emma, whom he described as fitting his preferred victim profile. He had waited until the family was asleep before using his master key to enter their room. The journal described how he had carefully unlocked the door and disengaged the chain, then had approached Emma's bed. He had woken her up gently, telling her that there was a problem with the plumbing in their room, and that her parents had asked him to move her to another room, that Emma had trusted him because he was wearing a motel uniform and had presented himself as an authority figure. The journal described how she had followed him willingly, believing that she was being taken to safety. Hendricks had led her to his car, which was parked behind the motel, and had driven her to his house. He had taken Emma to his basement, where he had held her captive for 3 days. The journal contained disturbing details about what he had done to her during that time, but it also revealed that Emma had been extraordinarily brave and resourceful. She had repeatedly attempted to escape, had hidden her backpack as a clue for investigators, and had even managed to take the photograph of the basement before Hendricks had discovered her camera. The journal revealed that Emma had been far from passive during her captivity. She had fought back against Hendricks, had tried to escape multiple times, and had even attempted to convince him to let her go. She had told him about her family, about her dreams of seeing Yellowstone, and about how much her parents and brother loved her. On the 4th day of her captivity, according to the journal, Emma had made a final escape attempt. She had managed to get out of the basement while Hendricks was distracted, and had run toward the main road, hoping to flag down a passing car. But Hendricks had discovered her absence quickly and had caught up with her in the woods behind his property. The journal described the final confrontation in clinical detail. Emma had fought desperately, trying to escape even as Hendricks dragged her back toward the house. In his rage and panic, he had struck her with a rock, killing her instantly. The journal indicated that her death had not been planned. Hendricks had intended to keep her alive longer, but Emma's escape attempt had forced his hand. The journal indicated that Hendricks had buried Emma's body somewhere in the woods, but he had not provided specific details about the location. He had then disposed of her other belongings by hiding them in various locations around town, including the backpack behind the wall at the gas station. The search for Emma's remains became the next focus of the investigation. Teams of searchers combed through the woods behind the Hendricks property, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs to look for any sign of a burial site. The area was vast and heavily wooded, making the search extremely difficult. The search continued for weeks, with volunteers from the community joining law enforcement in the effort to find Emma's body. The Henderson family participated in the search, despite the emotional toll it took on them. They needed to find their daughter and give her a proper burial. Linda Henderson had taken leave from her teaching job to participate in the search. She spent long days walking through the woods, looking for any sign of her daughter's grave. The physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the emotional toll of searching for Emma's body, but Linda felt compelled to be there. She couldn't bear the thought of strangers finding her daughter while she sat at home waiting. David Henderson had also taken time off work to join the search. He worked with the technical teams, helping to operate the ground-penetrating radar equipment and coordinating with the cadaver dog handlers. The methodical nature of the search appealed to his analytical mind, and it gave him a sense of purpose during what was otherwise an unbearable waiting period. The search teams worked in a grid pattern, covering every square foot of the wooded area behind the Hendricks property. The woods were dense and difficult to navigate, with thick underbrush and fallen logs that made progress slow. The terrain was also uneven, with several ravines and rocky outcroppings that could potentially conceal a burial site. After 2 weeks of searching, they had covered nearly 100 acres without finding any sign of Emma's remains. The investigators began to worry that they might be looking in the wrong area, or that the journal's description of the burial location was intentionally misleading. It was Tommy Henderson who ultimately found his sister's grave. Working with a search team in a remote section of the woods, about a quarter-mile from the Hendricks house, he noticed a depression in the ground that seemed artificial. The area was partially concealed by a fallen tree, and the depression was filled with leaves and forest debris. "Over here," Tommy called out, his voice tight with emotion. "I think I found something." The search team leader, a veteran investigator named Detective Mike Patterson, approached the area carefully. He had been working missing person cases for 15 years, and he had developed an eye for the subtle signs that might indicate a burial site. The depression that Tommy had found was about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, consistent with a grave. "Good eye," Patterson told Tommy. "Let's get the ground-penetrating radar over here." The radar confirmed what they had suspected there was a disturbance in the soil that was consistent with a burial. The forensic team was called in to begin the careful process of excavation. They worked slowly and methodically, using brushes and small tools to avoid disturbing any evidence. Sarah Chun stood beside the Henderson family as the excavation progressed. She had been dreading this moment for weeks, knowing that finding Emma's body would bring closure, but also devastating confirmation of what they all suspected. The family stood in silence, holding hands and trying to prepare themselves for what they were about to see. After several hours of careful work, the forensic team uncovered the first evidence of human remains. A small fragment of bone, clearly from a child, was found about 3 feet below the surface. The medical examiner, Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, confirmed that the remains were human and consistent with a child of Emma's age. The excavation continued for the rest of the day, with the team working to carefully remove all of Emma's remains and any associated evidence. The body had been wrapped in a blue tarp and buried in a shallow grave, with rocks and dirt piled on top to conceal it. The acidic soil and moisture had caused significant decomposition, but enough remained to positively identify the victim. Medical examiner confirmed that the remains were those of Emma Henderson, identifying her through dental records and DNA analysis. She had been buried in the clothes she had been wearing when she disappeared: a pink t-shirt with a unicorn design and blue shorts that her mother had bought her for the trip. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with the account in Hendrick's journal. Dr. Martinez found evidence of a single blow to the skull that would have caused immediate unconsciousness and death within minutes. There were also signs of previous injuries, healed fractures to the ribs and arm, that suggested Emma had been physically abused during her captivity. The discovery of Emma's body brought a mixture of relief and grief to the Henderson family. They finally had answers about what had happened to their daughter, but those answers came with the devastating confirmation that she had been dead for 12 years. The funeral for Emma Henderson was held on a crisp October morning, 12 years after her disappearance. The entire town of Crawford turned out to pay their respects, along with law enforcement officers from across the region who had worked on the case. The service was held at Crawford Community Church, the same church where the Henderson family had attended prayer vigils during the weeks after Emma's disappearance. Emma was buried in Crawford Memorial Cemetery, in a plot overlooking the mountains she had been so excited to see. The headstone bore a simple inscription: "Emma Henderson, beloved daughter and sister, forever in our hearts." Below the inscription was a carving of a unicorn, Emma's favorite animal. At the service, Linda Henderson spoke about her daughter's courage and determination, even in the face of unimaginable horror. She talked about how Emma had fought to survive, how she had left clues for investigators, and how she had never given up hope of returning to her family. "Emma was 9 years old when she was taken from us," Linda said, her voice breaking with emotion. "But in those final days, she showed the courage of someone much older. She fought for her life, and she fought to help us find her. She never stopped being our brave, smart, beautiful little girl." David Henderson spoke about the importance of never giving up hope, even in the darkest moments. He thanked the investigators who had worked tirelessly on the case, and he particularly thanked Detective Sarah Chun for her dedication and persistence. Detective Chun never let Emma become just another cold case, David said. She kept Emma's memory alive, and she never stopped fighting for justice. We will always be grateful for her commitment to our family. Tommy Henderson, now a young man of 19, spoke about his sister's impact on his life and his decision to pursue a career in criminal justice. He talked about how Emma's disappearance had shaped his understanding of the world and how her memory had inspired him to dedicate his life to helping other families find answers. Emma was my big sister, and she was supposed to protect me, Tommy said. But in the end, she's still protecting me. She's protecting all of us. Her story will help prevent other families from going through what we've gone through. Her courage will inspire other investigators to never give up on missing children. The resolution of Emma Henderson's case had broader implications for law enforcement in the region. The discovery of Harold Hendricks' crimes led to the reopening of several other cold cases, and investigators were able to provide closure to additional families who had been searching for answers for years. Jennifer Walsh, the teenage girl who had disappeared in 1995, was found buried in another section of the woods behind Hendricks' property. Her parents, who had never stopped looking for her, were finally able to lay their daughter to rest. The discovery of her remains also led to the arrest of an accomplice who had helped Hendricks dispose of the body. 2 other victims were identified through items found in Hendricks' trophy collection, and their remains were eventually located as well. The investigation revealed that Hendricks had been responsible for at least 7 murders over the course of nearly 20 years, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in the region's history. The case also led to changes in how missing person investigations were conducted. The fact that Hendricks had been questioned and cleared during the original investigation highlighted the importance of more thorough background checks and follow-up investigations. New protocols were established to ensure that potential suspects were more carefully scrutinized, and that investigations remained active for longer periods. Sarah Chun was promoted to lieutenant and became the head of the Crawford County Sheriff's Department's Major Crimes Unit. She had gained national recognition for her work on the Henderson case, and she was frequently invited to speak at conferences and training seminars about cold case investigations. The case had taken a personal toll on Sarah, who had spent 12 years thinking about Emma Henderson and wondering what had happened to her. The resolution of the case brought professional satisfaction, but it also brought a sense of loss. Emma had been a presence in Sarah's life for so long that her absence was almost palpable. Sarah continued to work on cold cases, using the lessons learned from the Henderson investigation to help other families find answers. She had developed a reputation as a tenacious and skilled investigator, and she was often called upon to consult on difficult cases in other jurisdictions. Tommy Henderson completed his degree in criminal justice and was hired as a detective trainee by the Crawford County Sheriff's Department. He worked under Lieutenant Chun's supervision, and together they continued to investigate cold cases and missing person reports. Tommy brought a unique perspective to the work, having experienced the victim's family side of an investigation. He understood the emotional needs of families dealing with missing loved ones, and he was skilled at providing support and comfort during difficult times. The partnership between Sarah Chun and Tommy Henderson became legendary within the department. Sarah provided the experience and technical skills, while Tommy brought fresh perspectives and an intuitive understanding of victim psychology. Together, they solved several cold cases that had been considered unsolvable. The Hendricks property was eventually demolished, and the land was turned into a memorial park dedicated to the victims of violent crime. The park featured walking trails, a playground, and a small amphitheater where community events were held. A plaque at the entrance to the park bore Emma Henderson's name and photograph, along with the inscription, "In memory of Emma Henderson, and all children who have been lost to violence. May their courage inspire us to never give up hope." The memorial park became a place of healing for the Crawford community, which had been traumatized by Emma's disappearance and the subsequent revelation of Hendrick's crimes. The park provided a space for reflection and remembrance, and it served as a reminder of the importance of protecting children and supporting families in crisis. The case of Emma Henderson's disappearance became a textbook example of how persistence, new technology, and community involvement could help solve even the most challenging missing person cases. It was studied in criminal justice programs across the country, and Sarah Chun frequently spoke at conferences about the importance of never giving up on missing children. The case also became the subject of a book written by a true crime author who had followed the investigation closely. The book, titled The Pink Backpack, The Emma Henderson Case, became a bestseller and helped raise awareness about missing children and the importance of cold case investigations. For the Henderson family, the resolution of Emma's case brought a complicated mix of emotions. They finally had answers about what had happened to their daughter, but those answers came with the devastating confirmation that she had been dead for 12 years. They had closure, but they also had to confront the reality that Emma would never come home. Linda Henderson returned to teaching after taking a year off to deal with the emotional aftermath of the case. She found that working with children helped her heal, and she established a scholarship fund in Emma's name to help students who wanted to pursue careers in law enforcement or criminal justice. The Emma Henderson Memorial Scholarship became one of the most prestigious awards at Crawford Community College, providing full tuition assistance to students who demonstrated academic excellence and a commitment to public service. The scholarship had helped dozens of students pursue their dreams of careers in law enforcement, and several recipients had gone on to become police officers, detectives, and FBI agents. David Henderson remained in Crawford, working as an insurance adjuster and becoming an advocate for missing children. He frequently spoke at schools and community events about child safety and the importance of being aware of potential dangers. David also became involved with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, serving on their board of directors and helping to develop new protocols for investigating missing child cases. His experience as the parent of a missing child gave him unique insights into the challenges faced by families dealing with these tragedies. The Henderson family's advocacy work helped pass new legislation that improved the resources available to law enforcement agencies investigating missing person cases. The Emma Henderson Act, passed by the state legislature 2 years after the case was resolved, provided additional funding for cold case investigations and established new training requirements for officers working on missing person cases. Discovery of Emma's backpack behind the wall at the abandoned gas station had been the key that unlocked the mystery of her disappearance. That pink backpack, with its faded unicorns and innocent contents, had waited 12 years to tell its story. When it finally did, it brought justice for Emma and closure for a family that had never stopped hoping for answers. The backpack itself became a powerful symbol of the case, representing both the innocence that had been lost and the determination that had ultimately brought justice. It was displayed at the Crawford County Sheriff's Department, along with a plaque that told Emma's story and honored the investigators who had worked to solve her case. Sarah Chun kept a photograph of the backpack on her desk, a reminder of the case that had defined her career and changed her life. She looked at it every day, remembering Emma Henderson and all the other victims whose cases remained unsolved. The case had taught Sarah that justice was not always swift, but it was possible. It had shown her that even the coldest cases could be solved with persistence, dedication, and a little bit of luck. Most importantly, it had reminded her why she had become a police officer in the first place: to help people, to seek justice. And to never give up hope. Emma Henderson's story became a testament to the power of love, persistence, and the human spirit's refusal to give up in the face of tragedy. Her family's determination to find her, combined with the dedication of law enforcement officers who refused to let her case go cold, ultimately brought her home. The case also served as a reminder of the importance of community involvement in missing person investigations. The contractor who found the backpack, the elderly cleaning lady who recognized the basement, and the hundreds of volunteers who searched for Emma all played crucial roles in solving the case. Their collective efforts demonstrated that finding missing children requires the involvement of entire communities, not just law enforcement, but perhaps most importantly, Emma's story showed that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. Her courage and resourcefulness during her captivity, her determination to leave clues for investigators, and her family's refusal to give up searching all contributed to the eventual resolution of the case. The pink backpack that started it all was eventually returned to the Henderson family, who kept it as a reminder of their daughter's courage and resourcefulness. Inside that backpack, along with Emma's diary and photographs, they found a letter that she had written but never had the chance to send. Dear Mom and Dad and Tommy, if you're reading this, then something bad has happened to me. I want you to know that I'm not scared, and I'm trying to be brave like you always taught me. I'm trying to find a way to come home. I love you all so much, and I hope I get to see you again soon. If I don't, please remember that I was happy. Remember the good times we had together. Remember that I love you. Love, Emma. The letter was dated July 16, 2012, the day after Emma's disappearance, and the same day she had carved her initials into the basement wall. It was a final gift from a daughter to her family, a message of love and hope that had waited 12 years to be delivered. Along with the letter, they found several other items that Emma had hidden in her backpack. There was a small notebook where she had written down everything she could remember about her captor, including a detailed description of his appearance and the layout of the basement where she was being held. There was also a hand-drawn map showing the route from the motel to the Hendricks house, which Emma had somehow managed to memorize during her abduction. Most remarkably, there was a small piece of fabric that Emma had torn from Hendricks' clothing during one of her escape attempts. The fabric was tested for DNA and provided additional evidence linking Hendricks to the crime. Even in her final days, Emma had been thinking like a detective, gathering evidence that would help solve her own case. The discovery of these items provided additional confirmation of Emma's remarkable courage and intelligence. At 9 years old, she had displayed the kind of clear thinking and determination that many adults would have struggled to maintain under such circumstances. The case also revealed the importance of teaching children about personal safety and the dangers they might face. Emma's parents had always been careful about stranger danger, but they had never imagined that their daughter could be abducted from a locked motel room by someone who appeared to be in a position of authority. The Henderson family became advocates for child safety education, working with schools and community organizations to teach children about the tactics used by predators and the importance of trusting their instincts when something doesn't feel right. They also worked to improve security at motels and hotels, pushing for better background checks for employees and improved security measures to protect guests. Their efforts led to new industry standards that made it more difficult for predators to gain access to potential victims. The case of Emma Henderson's disappearance had started with a family road trip and a dream of seeing Yellowstone National Park. It had ended with a tragic discovery in a shallow grave in the woods behind a serial killer's house. But it had also become a story of love, courage, and the power of never giving up hope. Emma Henderson never got to see the buffalo and bears at Yellowstone, but her story touched the lives of thousands of people across the country. Her courage in the face of unimaginable horror, inspired other victims to fight back. Her family's determination to find her motivated other families to never give up searching for their missing loved ones. And her case showed that even the most challenging investigations could be solved with persistence, dedication, and the support of an entire community. The pink backpack that had been hidden behind a gas station wall for 12 years had finally told its story. And that story, while tragic, was also a testament to the human spirit's capacity for love, hope, and justice. Emma Henderson's memory lived on in the scholarship that bore her name, in the memorial park that honored her courage, and in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by her story. In the end, Emma Henderson had come home, not in the way her family had hoped for 12 years, but in the way that mattered most, with answers, with justice, and with the knowledge that her story would help protect other children from the same fate. The little girl who had disappeared during a family road trip had become a symbol of courage, determination, and the power of love to overcome even the darkest tragedy. The case would be remembered for generations as a reminder that every missing child matters, that every family deserves answers, and that sometimes the smallest clues, like a pink backpack hidden behind a wall, can unlock the biggest mysteries. Emma Henderson's story had ended, but her legacy would continue to inspire those who worked to protect children and seek justice for the innocent. And in Crawford, Montana, a small town that had been forever changed by one little girl's disappearance, the memorial park stood as a testament to the power of community, the importance of never giving up hope, and the enduring love of a family that had never stopped searching for their daughter. The pink backpack had finally come home, and with it, the answers that had been sought for 12 long years.